Targeting tiger moms. Now this is thoughtful. Hello, I'm Nikki Wang in Shanghai. Recently on Thoughtful China, we examined the best ways to promote brands amongst Chinese mothers. That episode was inspired by Amy Chua's recent book, Battle Hymn of the Tiger Mother. We focused on what marketers need to know about these women because tiger moms are very careful shoppers of anything consumed by their kids: food, beverages, entertainment, education, technology, sports, and more. Our guests on the episode explained there is more to these women than being mothers. Their attitudes towards raising children has changed dramatically in the past few years. So we're now sharing the extended version of our interview with a guest speaker in the episode. Alan Wang, CEO and founder of social media website Babytree, a kind of Chinese Facebook for parents and kids. We hope you're enjoying it. There has been a lot of talk in the West since Amy's new book about the so-called tiger moms, but she didn't raise her children in China. How common is this parenting style in China?
I think if you sort of think about the image portrayed by Amy's book of a China or Chinese parents raising their children, you got this image of a very strict, controlling, and punishing parent who really want the best of their children, but for the parents' good, more likely than for children's well-being. We asked lots of parents actually on our site Babytree what they want their children growing up to be. I think that question is probably a good indicator of the kind of a parenting style they use as well. The top three answers are they want their children to be happy, they want their children to be confident, and they want them to do whatever they want to do. So those three answers actually initially struck us as being very different from the last generation. But then you think about it, these moms are born in the 1980s, and China's current economic and social reforms started actually just a couple of years actually ahead of that, around 1978. And then this generation of Chinese parents who grew up more likely to be thinking the way of their counterparts in the West versus actually dramatically different from their counterparts actually in the West. So I would argue that Amy's book portrays an image which probably applied to some parts of Chinese parenting in the past, but doesn't really mean it is actually mainstream way of parenting today.
That's a very interesting point. Actually, parents born after the 80s would be single children themselves, and then now they're having single children of their own, and they lack the support, the role models and experience in child rearing. How does your site sort of compensate that void?
I founded Babytree 4.5 years ago, precisely after noticing this phenomenon of one generation of single children raising their own young children, single children in the household. I noticed actually when I first returned from the US actually to go back to Beijing, the only opportunity young parents got to socialize with each other is when they put a stroller through the playground in the compound we're living in. So I think actually how pathetic if this is the only opportunity that they actually got to mingle with each other. They feel often very lonely. They feel actually their parents, the grandparents, are not much of a guidance in terms of parenting because their styles and knowledge are very much outdated. So we turn to believe that if we can do anything, we probably can do the single best thing is actually to make them connected, to have them share with each other, to have them interact with each other. And internet actually provides the best platform to make that happen. Therefore, that's the birth story of Babytree. And today we're linking more than 20 million parents a month. Most of them have children from newborn to preschool. And they are sharing and discussing a wide range of topics actually on parenting with each other.
Can you share with us some of the interesting debates you've seen on your Babytree's forum discussion about the different parenting styles?
There are lots of schools, of course, but on parenting in terms of actually for newborn, for instance, we have a big debate on which is a better way of actually providing the basic nutrition to the newborn, breastfeeding versus actually formula milk. And 4 years ago, the percentage of parents who claim they're actually exclusively relying on breastfeeding is roughly around 40%. 3 years ago, that number rose to 60%. 2 years ago, 80%. We've just finished another study, which is now standing at 90-some percent. So this huge debate on whether you rely on formula milk as the main way of feeding your newborn versus actually trusting yourself seems to have shifted from less than 40% to more than 90% just in the course of 4 years. So that's, for example, is a big debate which has been raging and going on for the past 4 years, and it seems to me that the better side, the believers of breastfeeding, has so far trumpeted everything else. Another big debate, of course, is whether or how early actually parents should send their children to what we call early education centers. In Chinese called 早教. So this notion of getting your children started early and educated in a structural way early has been a popular notion. But the debate is actually whether you send your school to a Western style early education center who focuses more on play, encouraging on self-initiatives, versus more of a traditional Amy Chua type of education center which focuses on systematic learning of Chinese characters, systematic learning of elementary English, and concentrating on the skills that children need to have before going into kindergarten. And again, 4 years ago, the majority of the parents actually are thinking, hey, we should have them learn something. Otherwise I'm actually losing the value of the tuition I pay or money I pay. Now, majority of the parents actually think playing, reading, and enjoying themselves, the children themselves actually, is the way actually to do parenting. So they're still sending their kids out to a third-party education center to receive some sort of early education, but the education focuses more on playing and unstructured learning versus the typical, stereotypical Chinese way of raising their children. Hey, I want him or her to learn something.
As consumers, what's the single most important thing to them? Because just now you talked about them having believe in themselves more so than brands. How can marketers sort of regain their trust?
That's a great question, and I'll start with a survey that actually we're releasing today together with Ogilvy. This is called China Mom's Happiness Index. And in this index, for the very first time, we provide a very systematic view of market by market, city by city differences or differentials between mom's self-claimed happiness. We believe actually if you look into this score and drivers of this score, you will actually understand a lot about actually how to talk to or speak to young moms who are often the purchase decision makers and gatekeepers of many of the products that we're talking about. A couple of key observations. One is mom's happiness goes down dramatically when they face a pressing situation. If you view themselves actually under a lot of pressure in life or work. So I think actually the number one thing for brand marketers to understand is actually, or try to do, is to seek out ways to reduce or relieve the tension and the pressure that today's modern moms in China actually face or think they face in workplace, at home, dealing with this sort of a challenge situation, how to allocate their time between work and life, so on and so forth. Number two is happier moms seems to enjoy more support from their immediate family as well as actually their surroundings. So they seem to have a support network, not only from husbands and relatives, but also actually from colleagues at workplace. And workplace sort of being parent-friendly has really never been China's workplace focus. We pay a lot of attention to efficiency. We pay a lot of attention actually to punching the your work card when you report and then leave duty and so on and so forth. I think we don't tend to pay much attention to giving young moms who return to work the kind of environment that foster their creativity and give them the kind of environment so that they can grow. That's, I think, actually a second insight. Thirdly, actually, I would say that when marketers think of China, they tend to think of China as one market. And if you look at your consumer base, where 15 to 17 million babies are born, and you times 6, we're talking about close to 100 million parents or with their children in this age bracket, in this market. You really cannot actually all put them into one bracket, one spot. They are divided into many different niche markets. For example, easily there's this line between first tier or more prosperous Chinese cities versus second tier, third tier, fourth and fifth tier cities. And the economic imbalance means the lower tier cities, while on the other hand have few dollars to spend on children's good or mom's good, but they're actually more willing to spend more money. This is a dichotomy, but dichotomy can be easily explained by people's mom's passion for quality goods that they can probably not easily obtain in their local markets, given where they're located. So this translates into a lot of opportunities by breaking the physical city barrier, for example, of launching your goods online via e-commerce. So I would say actually these three things combined are probably the top insights for marketers to recognize.
Have you seen any good advertisers who are already doing very well in connecting with different types of Chinese mothers?
Yes. There are those who have this awareness built early that Chinese moms have a stressful life. The kids should be raised to be a happy kid. And I think actually they ventured into a lot of the experimentation areas early on. I think to win in China oftentimes means you realize a trend early enough. You don't probably know how to do certain things in the most optimal way, but you have the courage and firmness in your decision making to do something in order to learn. So I'll give you two examples. And one is actually in the paper diaper category, which is actually Kimberly-Clark's Huggies brand. The other is a milk brand called Dumex from Europe. Huggies is one of Babytree's earliest advertisers because their marketing director happened to be a Babytree mom. And throughout the years, in 4 years actually, they stayed with us. And every few months, she would actually call me and say, tell me something about what's new for Chinese moms. Tell me something about actually how do you leverage social media as a way to transmit word-of-mouth marketing. Tell me something about actually what you think is the next cool thing for parents. And that dialogue actually enabled them to always sit on the cutting edge on what's new, what's the next one in terms of popular things for young moms. I think actually their results speak for themselves. In 9 years there in China, the results have actually, I think, increased by 30 to 40% in terms of business returns. That's one brand. Dumex, an European formula milk provider, they are fighting a pretty hard battle because on one hand, more and more Chinese moms are resorting to breastfeeding, which I just mentioned. Number two, there's a lot of concern on the quality of baby food, particularly actually formula milk, because of lots of bad stories and episodes of lower than acceptable ingredients actually that go into the formula milk milking. But they are able to portray themselves, certainly based on the fact that they are a quality manufacturer. And they are able to have a dialogue with Chinese moms, for example, by inviting them through the internet and through actually social media to their factories here in Shanghai, and actually to their research facilities and researchers who are dispatched from Europe to portray this image. They do care, and actually they do everything scientifically. Milk manufactured within China are not always questionable. In fact, Shanghai actually boasts world's best quality and most advanced powder milk manufacture facility. So those are two big brands actually are leveraging social community very cleverly and who are also on the cutting edge.
You talked about the importance of understanding the ever changes in consumer behavior. Can you tell us some of the latest product innovations on Babytree to specifically cater to these growing different in their needs?
I actually, it started with my background probably. I have a very different background versus your typical China internet entrepreneurs. I came from an offline background where I was at one point over 5 years with P&G as a brand manager. So I have this firm belief that internet is nothing but just another way of reaching them. It's just a platform. If you treat it as that way, and all your innovations come from recognizing what are the needs of parents, and how do we, using this vehicle, this platform, to satisfy them. I'll give you actually 2 or 3 quick examples. One is the rise of smartphones in parenting. iPhone 3, 4, and soon to be 5 are not only seized by people actually worldwide as a communication entertainment device. It is actually used by parents as a parenting device. So for example, parents are using it to educate their children, playing music, watching the useful and education-related actually videos, and using them as education tool. For example, so seizing that opportunity, we ventured into the sort of internet or smartphone application market, and by launching a dozen or so mom-related, smartphone applications. Some of them gave you the power of asking a question to all the community members actually online, and getting the answer actually through your smartphone. The other device actually allow you to track when you receive certain things. For example, your supply of diapers, and then what's the rate of using those diapers. And you can pretty much actually accurately predict when the diapers will be used up. And so that you don't have to face the embarrassing situation when you reach for the diaper basket and everything's empty, so you have to go out and buy at that moment. This application simply alerts you that you have to buy a couple of days ahead of time. So that's one that, applications for smartphones in a mobile area. The other thing is actually, we focus a lot about how to enable Chinese parents to document the everyday growth of their babies and their families. In the old days, blogging is one way of doing it. But in the world of Weibo, which is microblogging and Twittering, we've actually significantly simplified how people document. They don't have to write 1,000 character diaries or blogs anymore. They can just document using a couple of hundred Chinese characters and actually supplement that blog with a lot of good pictures. So we're changing the way people actually input into their diaries, as well as actually people are visualizing or seeing how their documentation actually are displayed online. As any products actually, web probably the most that needs to go up fast and optimize fast. So we're not chased by our user, we're chasing our users in terms of meeting their ever-changing demand.
Do you think Chinese mothers are key decision makers when it comes to household purchases?
They're absolutely key decision makers in many of the categories of the products actually are available to parents and their kids, except for a few, for example, cars. In auto purchasing, dads probably make 55% of decisions, according to our survey that we are conducting with Ogilvy and launching today. But I think one very key insight that's related to this category, purchase decision making, is how early those decisions are made. This is absolutely critical for brand marketers to realize, because they probably have lost the battle already if you're not the brand of choice at the age of 6 months. We have heard 2 surveys. So our editor has shared 2 surveys with us. In a survey we've launched with Ogilvy, we've just learned from the results that 96% of the moms have already made their decision of brand, the choice of the brand, before or when they reach the offline retail store. That's actually significantly higher than our hypothesis, which is typically around 40 to 50% worldwide, actually. If you talk about the US, 40-some%. Korea, a little bit higher, 60%. China, 95%. And you then follow up that question with 2 other questions. When are those decisions made? And how are those decisions made? The answer to the when question is, I've made my decision actually 30% of the moms during pregnancy. And the rest of the 70%, half of those made a decision during the 3 or 4 days after they deliver the baby while they're staying in the hospital. And the rest of them actually all between the newborn and 6 months. So they received enough influence by people who are around them in the offline world, as well as actually by the online world, as well as actually the advertisement that reached them during that phase, so that when they get out of the 6 months period, all the decisions almost in terms of brand choice are already made. And this is actually a remarkable finding that startled all of us, because China at this point probably is the single country with the highest percentage of decision making between the age of pregnancy actually and newborn and 6 months. And online, influenced by online and offline friends, are more powerful triggers of decision making than all the rest of the media vehicles combined. All the rest of the vehicles we're talking about, traditional vehicles, on TV, paper, print, outdoor, so on and so forth. This is not to say that TV, for example, is no longer important. It is still powerful because it tells a story in 60 seconds or 30 seconds in the US. But early decision-making influencers, all no media, and social media actually.
How can marketers better target these online influencers?
I think this is another great question. They have to find out who they are, and they actually have to learn how to talk to them. The influencers are not necessarily fixed. So first of all, one influencer can be a huge word-of-mouth triggering person for one product, but he or she, most likely another mom, probably is not an influencer for another category of goods. So you have to seize them where they are. And this is where actually social network comes in. And you have to observe, probably come up with a set of metrics carefully with the social network sites to put people in a bracket they can vaguely define as potential influencers or influencer potential. And then for that target audience, you have to talk to them in a very natural way. If they're educated, and more of them are, they really reject this notion of selling your product directly on my face to me. You have to appear to be very genuine, understanding them, becoming part of their life, becoming part of their conversation. So today, if your budget is very limited, then the only thing you have to resort to is actually talk to influencers. If your budget is actually significant, then you have to realize the old way of allocating your budget is no longer useful or efficient. You have to reallocate a sufficient portion of your traditional media budget to new media, such as actually social networks. And then here, the methodology of marketing also changes. Instead of actually having one way of communication, just broadcasting how good your product really are, you have to cultivate relationship, educate your users, and becoming their friends. So befriending your influencer is probably the single most important strategy.
To summarize our discussion, what is the single most important thing that Western markets need to understand about Chinese mothers?
They have to understand that the Chinese parents are, most of them, 87 to 90%, now born in what we call the post-80s generation. And this generation of parents who grow up in the post-economic reform era in China really want their children to be free, enjoy their life, and be confident of themselves. And they also face mounting pressure in their work and family lives. And so those advertisers who understand this generation of new Chinese moms and parents understand seek out ways to relieve the burden that they face in everyday life and work life are the brands that are going to come up and win. Number two, China is not one single market. China is many, many vertical markets. The most important driver is actually the economic tiering of Chinese cities. So you have to recognize what works for tier 1 cities such as Beijing, Shanghai, but those things may or may not work, probably wouldn't work most likely in other tier cities. And you have to adapt your different strategies to meet the needs of those parents.
Thank you, Alan, for being on Talk for China.
Thank you.
That wraps it up for us today. Be sure to subscribe to us on Tudou and YouTube. You can also follow us on Weibo and Twitter. See you again.